Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're hailing from. Welcome to another edition of Ask an OpenShift Admin. I'm Chris Short, executive producer of OpenShift TV. I am joined by the one and only Andrew Sullivan. Andrew, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. The pollen storm here in Raleigh
Mm,
is starting to subside. You lived here for a number of years. You know how that
yeah.
is.
Oh, that's ooh.
So it's I think if we get another good rainstorm to come through, that'll do away with a lot of the pine pollen that's left, and we'll be back to normal. So JP Dade, thank you for the like on the intro animation. Chris and I were actually just saying how we've never actually listened to the music that goes along with it. Like we know there's music
We know this
because
sound.
yeah, they told us there is, but neither one of us. We've always just watched it through the stream,
I
which
mean, and what's funny is like they just gave me the video and I was like, oh, it's like 6 seconds. Okay, no problem. Let me just jump it and throw it in Zoom, like throw it in OBS. And I was like, this morning I realized I never had listened to it before.
yeah, funny how that is.
Yeah.
But yeah, the creative team has done just phenomenal work with the move to from OpenShift Admin Office Hour to Ask an OpenShift Admin and
Yeah.
all of the artwork and the reoccurring stuff that they do to keep all that up. So can't thank them enough. It's really been great.
Yes, exactly.
I know we got distracted there and went a little off the rails. But yeah, I am Andrew Sullivan, technical marketing manager with the Red Hat Cloud Platforms business unit, and this is one of our office hours series of live streams. So the goal here is for you, our audience, to ask us literally anything that's on your mind, whatever it is that's bothering you, that you got questions about. Right, anything that happens to come up that you want an answer to with regard to OpenShift, we are here to help. So Chris and I both have administrative backgrounds. We were both admins for a number of years in various roles in various organizations. So we're happy to help with those. If you have a developer question, we'll do our best, but I can't guarantee that we'll be able to answer that. But that doesn't mean that we won't give up, regardless of what question it is. If we don't know the answer, we'll be sure to go and find it. And if we do give you an answer and it happens to be wrong, let us know. I love to be proven wrong. I was just having a
As do
conversation
I.
with one of our support guys this morning. Prove me wrong. I love it. So, with that being said, if you all have any questions, don't hesitate any point in time. Put those into chat across any of the various streams or any of the various platforms that we're streaming on. We'll be sure to get those. We'll answer those.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have any questions, or in the absence of questions from you all, our loving and adoring audience, we do have a topic. And I try to keep or try to have something to talk about in that respect. And hopefully it triggers some questions for you as well. And today, that topic is day two operations. So Red Hat uses the nomenclature where we have this kind of day numbering scheme, right? Day zero, day one, day two. Day zero often refers to, and I don't know how ubiquitous across the industry this is. I've heard sometimes different numbers. I've heard different phases, stuff like that. So phase zero is often the architecture and design phase. Phase one is deployment. And then phase two is essentially, or day two is essentially everything after that, right? Day two
Right.
until decommissioning effectively, which could be day 10,000. Wow, that would be a long time. It's what
Day 10,000. That's
it's
quite
like
a
30
few
years.
Yeah.
So, all right, maybe that one's a little long.
Okay. Yeah. We don't want your day 10,000 operations, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Well, hopefully it's lots of updates in between, right? So yeah, today I want to talk about day two. And a lot of this topic spurred from a series of blog posts that I did back in the 4 days. I think it was 4.3. That turned into a section of the documentation. And since it's been a while since we talked about it, and by that I mean I don't think we've ever talked about it on the stream. It was just in the blog post. I wanted to revisit some of that. And importantly, I want to get your perspective, your feedback. What are the things that you're doing that you feel aren't well organized in the documents? What are the things that you feel might be missing? Or what are the things that are important to you as our audience from a day two perspective? However, before we get started, and I see some chat coming in,
Yeah.
Waleed, I see your question there.
I answered it. We use Hive.
Okay.
We don't use Cluster API, folks. Hive is awesome. Take a look at it. There's a lot of fun, cool stuff coming out of it. So it's a project I like a lot. Cluster API has its use cases, but we use Hive.
Yep. And
then
Catherine talked about that last week on the stream when we
Right.
talked about the installation methods.
Exactly. So next question is there a plan for the OADP operator, OpenShift API for data protection, to be supported by Red Hat for enterprise use? It's currently community only. That I don't know. I will
So
go check.
I believe the answer to that is yes. I don't know the
Eventually,
time frame
yeah.
for that. So we do know the PM on that side, so I can reach out to him, and Chris, I'll chat that to you on our side.
Yeah. We'll get the answer to that. But eventually, I think is the answer. We just don't know yet when.
Yep. Yeah. So I strongly suspect that will be, a GA, right? A fully supported thing coming from Red Hat at some point in the future.
There will be an announcement of some sort. Keep your eye on the blog for sure.
Yep. And I would also suggest, I don't know if tomorrow is one of the days. So the OCS team, or I guess now they're ODF, the OpenShift Data Foundation team, has a bi-weekly, every other week live stream as well. So that would be a good group to ask that question to as well.
Which is weird. I think we had to skip last week for some reason, to be honest with you. But yeah. Next week we can talk about that for sure. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. We can bring that up with Michelle.
So Chris. Yeah, absolutely. Arvin asks, how does the V3 cluster administration differ from V4? And that is a big question.
Yeah, it's both. It's deceivingly simple and incredibly complex.
Right.
So the short answer is, on the surface, not substantially. Right? It's still OpenShift. It's still Kubernetes. You're still interacting with it and doing it. But when you step down just one step, it's hugely and dramatically different.
Yes.
And we've talked about that over a couple of shows. I'll see if I can dig up some of those. But effectively, the trigger, the reason why we went from OpenShift 3 to OpenShift 4 was the introduction and widespread adoption of operators for all things OpenShift.
Mm-hmm.
So at the core, this changes how we administer OpenShift. So for example, with OpenShift 3, the install was done via Ansible playbooks. Whenever I needed to change something, lots of So whenever I needed to change something, whenever I needed to administer those nodes, the preferred way was to do it through an Ansible playbook, right? If it was something that Red Hat, like we wanted you to do in a controlled manner or something like that, there was a playbook. If it was something that still supported, still possible, but maybe I'm not going to say outside of the norm, but just not something that we had a playbook for, it was sure SSH into the node and do what you need to do, or use your own Ansible playbooks to configure something. But ultimately, it was managed outside of the cluster, right? Managing things like the underlying operating system, the underlying Kubernetes and kubelet and all that other stuff was done externally. The move to operators brought all of that stuff inside. And instead of using an Ansible playbook to go and say, I'm going to pick on Crony, right? Because that's one of the things I want to talk about today.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
configuring time synchronization. Instead of running an Ansible playbook that says, go and start this service on all of the nodes and put this configuration file in place and all those other things. Instead, we do it through what's now the machine config operator, right? Where I use the machine config operator to push configuration out to all of those nodes, right? The registry, similarly. Right, the registry, instead of deploying those pods and providing that configuration as a config map, or I think it was a config map back in 4. Or in 3.x.
Before you get too deep, what is the benefit of operators, right? Like, I think that's the point that we're trying to get across here, right?
Yeah. So that's a really good point. And I know that we have, and my tabs got scattered because I had to log out and log back in.
Yeah.
So somewhere I've got a link to an episode that we did a while ago that was effectively what are operators for OpenShift administrators. And effectively what it does is it takes all of that knowledge, all of those actions, all of those things that were previously in an Ansible playbook, codifies them, and then makes them available directly in the cluster. So before, right, if Red Hat created an Ansible playbook, you could assume that it was Red Hat applying, in Red Hat engineering, applying our knowledge, our expertise around the system to say, this is how you should configure it, right? When I want to configure X, we're going to do these things. We're just putting that into the Kubernetes cluster itself and then executing that using Kubernetes native paradigms. So that's the big thing. And operators are a huge topic, right? There's literal, weeks long courses around operators and all of the possibilities that they have there and everything else. But the purpose is, as an administrator, we get out of the business of going and managing individual nodes, right? SSHing, connecting, Ansible, whatever it is.
Yeah.
To instead, I use an operator and I configure the operator to how I want the cluster to look. And then the operator makes sure the cluster looks that way.
And the best part about operators are you can use Helm charts, you can write them with Ansible, or you could do, native Go to write your operators. And there's also a bunch of other projects. You can even write operators in Bash. Shh, don't tell
anybody. and Andy Block just had a shiver down his spine.
I know, right?
His ears are burning.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and I also want to make it clear, you don't have to write any operators, right?
No, you don't.
As an administrator, yeah, you don't have to worry about, I would say 98% of the things you want to do are probably already covered by an operator or can be done by an operator today. It really just depends on how much customization you're doing. Let's see. I'm just looking over the questions real quick here, or the chat rather, before I get into
dropping in a bunch of links after Arvin's question.
Okay.
And JP Day saying operators are awesome because they can upgrade themselves, basically, which is entirely true,
including the cluster itself.
Yeah, they can upgrade the whole cluster for you. So you've got some stuff that's top of mind for day 2.
I do.
Yeah.
So first, for those who regularly tune into this particular live stream, you know that I tend to start the show off talking about some things that have come up in the last week or kind of since the last episode that I feel are important to you, our audience, to administrators for OpenShift, that we can bring up and we can talk about. So a lot of times these come from both you, the audience, right? If you reach out and ask us questions to help clarify things or point out, Andrew, you were full of crap, you were wrong. I enjoy issuing retractions and corrections, so please don't hesitate to do that at any time. But it also comes internally, right? When our field folks, when our engineering folks ask and answer questions and stuff like that, I take that knowledge, I squirrel it away, and then provide those pearls of wisdom to you all. So the first one that I want to talk about is I've seen this question come up, and at first I thought it was a fluke. And what I'm trying to figure out now is this just is there an easily misinterpreted phrase in the documents or something like that? But it's regarding subnets used by OpenShift clusters.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
So it's come up a few times, so I figured I should go ahead and discuss it. And essentially, it comes down to, if I'm deploying OpenShift, what is Red Hat's recommendation or guidance for how I should configure my underlying subnetting? So first, I'm going to take a slight detour and say, when you look at an install config, remember that there is 3 different subnets that it will ask for. Let me see if I have one available that I can use.
And G. Kumar, I see your question. We'll get to it in a second.
I think I have, I do. All right, so I'm going to share my screen real quick here. Are you the one I want? Yes, you are the one I want. All right, so please let us know in chat if you can't read this. Hopefully it's big enough. So this is just an install config that I have, right? So I ended this one in .clean because it has no pull secret inside of it, or a SSH key inside of it. So if we look at the networking section here, there are 3 network things that it's asking for. So the first one being the cluster network. This is effectively what subnets is it going to use for, in the case of OpenShift SDN, for each pod network on each host. So what that really means is it's going to take this /14, it's going to carve it up into a 23 for each one of the nodes in the cluster. And then when a pod is instantiated on that node, it gets assigned an IP address from that /23. That's all it means, right? And then OpenShift SDN and IP tables does effectively masquerade, right? NAT, in order to access those across the various nodes. So the second one, I'm going to jump down here to the bottom. Service network. This is just the range of IP addresses that when you create a service object in Kubernetes in OpenShift, this is the IP address range that it will be assigned from. So the third one is the important one here. And this machine network.cider is, we're telling Kubernetes, we're telling OpenShift to look for a interface, a physical interface on the nodes on this network. And when you find that interface, use that one to instantiate the SDN and do a lot of other things inside of the cluster. So this is, if you have all of your worker nodes, or all of your nodes in the cluster, I should say, have just a single interface, it's not critical that you configure this correctly. Basically, the cluster will probably work just fine. You'll never notice it the majority of the time, unless you're using a proxy or there's a couple of other scenarios in there. So for example, this network automatically gets added to the no proxy list. So if that happens to be something that you're using, right, you want to definitely make sure that it is configured correctly. Likewise, if you have more than one interface, make sure that that value is configured correctly. Because if it doesn't see an interface that has an IP in this range, it basically takes the first network adapter. And particularly if you're doing a non-integrated install and it's across different platforms, I've got some nodes that are in vSphere, I've got some nodes that are in Red Hat virtualization, I've got some nodes that are, quote unquote, bare metal, that are, physical servers. Those interfaces could be in a different order, right? What is, maybe this machine network is the first interface in vSphere, but it's the fourth interface on my bare metal nodes, on my physical nodes. And that can cause a lot of problems. So the question is, for this machine network, should I assign a dedicated subnet for every cluster that I create? Right? Cluster 1 gets 14.0/24. Cluster 2 gets 15.0/24. Cluster 3 gets 16.0, so on and so forth. The answer to that is no, you don't need dedicated subnets. It is sometimes handy just as an administrator, right? Because simple is what's the KISS principle, right? Keep it simple, silly.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes that is good, but it is not a requirement from a Red Hat perspective. So the next iteration on that is, well, should I have a dedicated subnet that only hosts OpenShift clusters? And the answer there is no, you don't need to do that, but there are some things to be aware of if you have multiple OpenShift clusters in the same subnet. And in particular, if you're using IPI. So if you're using on-prem IPI, so that would be bare metal IPI, right? Physical IPI, vSphere, Red Hat virtualization, OpenStack in some circumstances, so on and so forth. Any of those on-prem IPIs, they use a keep alive D instance to manage the virtual IPs associated with API and ingress, start.apps. So being keep alive D, it uses VRRP, which I don't remember what VRRP stands for now. Virtual routing and recovery? No.
Reconciling? I forget. Yeah. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
Virtual routing R protocol.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So bad, but yes. I'll look it up.
Anyways, so those VRRP IDs need to be unique across the entire subnet or across the entire domain. Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
There you go.
So it uses multicast across the entire subnet to basically advertise, hey, where's my peers with this same VRRP domain ID? So the function that generates those domain IPs with an OpenShift IPI on-prem instance bases it off of the cluster name. So and it is entirely possible to have a duplicate of those names or of those domain IDs. If that happens, it can be bad, right? Basically, it'll think that there's nodes that shouldn't be there, and it'll get confused, and you won't be able to stand up, for example, the new cluster. The existing cluster will probably just have some random errors that show up. It won't accept those new nodes because it won't recognize them, but the new cluster wouldn't stand up. So just be aware of that. Other than that, no real issues, nothing to be concerned about. Likewise, it's perfectly fine to have a subnet that is shared between OpenShift and other things, right? So you can, put your, domain controller, DNS server, whatever on the same subnet as OpenShift. You won't have any harm come from that, whether it's IPI or UPI. All right, I'm going to pause because I think there's some questions.
Well, one question has been answered. The Frankenholm question has been answered in chat. So Frankenholm, if you don't see it in chat, just keep scrolling down. It's right there at the very bottom. Imperam gave us the good name there. G Kumar asked, is there any Red Hat certified egress IP operator in the works? There are only community versions for egress IPAM operators available, which are not fully supported by managed clusters like ARO. That I can't tell you.
Yeah,
That's a good one, though.
So I thought OVN Kubernetes could do egress IPs, but I don't know if it does the IPAM side of it.
No, it doesn't. No.
So the whereabouts CNI might be needed to do the IPAM part of it. But for a managed service, that's a whole nother, bag of doorknobs. So the good news is, so one, we'll track down that. I've also reached out to our product manager for the managed services. So hopefully we'll be having an episode about managed services coming up in the not too distant future. So Chris, are you researching that one or reaching out on that one?
I'm looking through my list of people trying to figure out who to reach out to be honest with you.
Okay. We'll take that one for note and we'll follow up on that one.
Yeah. That's a good one. Who is the operator hub guru?
JP Dade, OpenShift SDN versus OVN Kubernetes. So we talked about that with Mark Curry a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And in general, there's not a substantial difference between them. OVN Kubernetes will move to being the default SDN in the OpenShift 4.9 timeframe, I believe he said.
Mm-hmm.
For now, it really depends on whether or not you need the additional features or capabilities of OVN Kubernetes. So the big ones there being cross operating system. So if you're using Windows nodes, for example, you need to be able to do that. If you want to use, I don't want to say more modern overlay technology, but newer overlay technology, Geneve versus VXLAN, that type of stuff. There's also a docs link that compares the two of them and gives you that option. And I'll see if I can find that at some point.
Oh my gosh.
But
SJBYLO, I don't even know how to say that, just shared a operator they wrote in Bash.
Nice.
So thank you for that. Yeah, that's cool. Example operator written in Bash. That's nice. I'm gonna look at this later and maybe break it a lot.
All right. So the second thing I wanted to talk about, this one is pretty straightforward, which is if you're familiar with, and I don't know when we started doing them. I think 4 or 5 quick starts.
Yes.
4,
5, and now more so in 4.7. Yeah.
Yeah. So quick starts are a way that we offer basically directly in the OpenShift interface, the ability to have a guided tour through some action. So the good news is, and I'm going to share my screen again, but this time I'm going to share the browser. So the good news is you can create these yourself. So for us administrators who, particularly like the senior administrators, et cetera, who are working on basically making things as easy and simple and consumable as possible for our junior peers, as well as maybe as administrators for developers or other people, you can write these little help scripts and it shows up inside of the cluster. Do I have one of these? I do. So it shows up like we have this, it brings up this little thing on the side and it says, okay, let me start doing this. What do I need to do? So click on the perspective switcher and it highlights it over here. I want to go to developer. I don't need the tour here, right? In the navigation menu, click add. So it's kind of this, right? You can step through, you can provide as much help or as much detail inside of your quick starts as you would like. The goal being provide that help, right? If you've got users who are constantly asking you the same questions over and over and over again, you can create these quick starts, deploy them into the cluster, and then let them self-help. I won't make any comments on how prone users are to actually reading those things. We all know that KCSs are great or knowledge bases are great in principle, but not everybody reads those. But it's an attempt at making that easier anyways. An important one. So I think it was a month ago. We talked about, maybe even longer, like 5 weeks. We talked about OpenShift 4.7 was released. I am
Long time, yeah.
sad to say, I think is the the feeling I'm going to choose that updates from 4.6 to 4.7 are still blocked. So this is the same issue that we've been talking about for a few weeks now.
Yeah.
Effectively, there is VMware with hardware versions 14 and later enabled hardware offload for VXLAN. RHEL kernel, or the kernel in RHEL 8.3, basically did the same thing or had something similar inside of there. RHEL 8.3 is the RHEL backing OpenShift 4.7, and there's some sort of conflict that's happening inside of there. The result is packet loss. So anywhere from a few percentage points upwards, packet loss is of course bad.
Yeah.
So
those
we have
retransmits will pile up,
and we have a BZ if you want to follow this saga, if you will.
Link.
Yep. So you can see inside of here, and I'm going to scroll down because if you are really desperate to get a 4.7 cluster up on vSphere and all that, there are some workarounds available inside of here, right? So here's someone who has gone through and disabled all of the offload, all of the checksum, right? All of these things inside of here, and they were able to get this up and running. So there's the potential for some workarounds, but there is nothing that we have
there.
Yeah.
Like doing everything in software, not as good as doing it in hardware. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. So there appears to be some workarounds. I haven't tested any of these. I don't know what our official stance on any of them is. But just be aware it is a blocker. It is preventing those upgrades. I know I sympathize, even though
I empathize.
vSphere is a big platform for OpenShift. It is not the only platform. And, I understand it's frustrating if you're not using vSphere, but it's blocking upgrades for you as well. So just know that we're working on it. I heard from engineering, and I'm on the threads directly between like OpenShift engineering, RHEL kernel engineering, and VMware engineering, and seeing all the things that's going on. So we are working on it and are very cognizant of it.
Yeah, very cognizant.
Just ask for patience. That's all. Let's see what was next. So I'm going to use the release of Code Ready Containers 1.25. So if you weren't aware, Code Ready Containers 1.25 released either yesterday or this morning. So it's available. It's OpenShift 4.5.7 based. So if you want to get up and testing and experimenting with 4.5.7, that's one of the ways to do it. But I also want to use this opportunity to talk about what are some other options if I want to kind of have a test cluster, or I want to experiment, or I just want to, what's the minimum amount of resources I can use or I can have available to me to get OpenShift up and running. And aside from Code Ready Containers, which remember deploys to your workstation, it creates a virtual machine. So whether you're Mac OS, Windows, or Linux based, it creates a virtual machine inside of there, and then installs a single node OpenShift cluster. There are some other options. So first, the CEE folks, the support folks, helpfully created this KCS, which basically explains that today, right now, the smallest cluster that you can deploy is 3 nodes. So I would suggest keeping an eye on this, right? You can click the little watch button up here. I think it's this one, follow.
Yep.
So you can be alerted when they update this, because this will be changing in the future. And in particular, if you watched the What's Next presentation, which was a little over a month ago now, and actually we can do the OpenShift.com new and next, I think is the shortcut link.
Something like that.
No,
I think
next and new.
Next and new. There we go. Next and new. There you go.
So that's the shortcut to always get to those 2 presentations, the what's next and what's new. Anyway, so if you watch that, you remember that we are hoping to have single node clusters in tech preview with OpenShift 4.8. So 4.8 is still a ways away. But remember that you can access nightly builds. So in the not too distant future, and I haven't checked this, I haven't looked, when nightlies start to become available for 4.8, it may be entirely possible to do a single node cluster in that like super early nightly tech preview, tech or dev preview. like it's would that be an alpha of an alpha? I don't know. Anyways,
just pulling it from source basically at that point.
Yeah. So anyways, we are on the cusp of having those, single node clusters available to do that, testing, to do that validation, to just get hands-on and start learning about OpenShift in a minimal environment that isn't your local laptop or desktop.
So JP Data asked real quick, can you install 4.7 on fresh on VMware, or is it still a problem there?
So from what I have heard,
no, I'm assuming no.
It's 90% yes, but only under one scenario, and that is if you use VM hardware version 13. So I have heard mixed things about, right, because basically only VM hardware version 14 plus is affected, but I don't know if that's because we just haven't heard about it yet with VM hardware version 13. Sorry, I'm having in my head every time I say virtual hardware, I just giggle a little bit because
virtual hardware. Yeah.
Anyways, so one of those oxymorons.
Yeah.
So anyways,
like
maybe with VM hardware version 13, it would work. Just keep in mind that VM hardware version 13 limits you in other areas, most especially the VMware CSI provisioner. So their provisioner requires VM hardware version 15 or later. So just be aware of that. It may be possible. I would definitely recommend testing it, not using it in production until you have fully and thoroughly tested that you're not going to experience any issues associated with that. Okay, so go ahead.
Well, Waleed was asking about, is cluster API covered by one of the operators? And he's on his phone, so he can't really type his questions very well at the moment, which I can't blame him. But Hive replaces the functionality of cluster API essentially. So
yeah, so this is something,
a Hive operator, right?
Yeah, and this is something that's a bit strange with Red Hat and with OpenShift specifically, because we sometimes mistakenly use the term cluster API when we mean cloud API, when we really mean machine API. So first, let's be careful with the nomenclature and the naming that we use. So I want to take a step back. So cluster API is the set of APIs that are being driven by VMware and I think Google for creating new clusters programmatically. Right. So basically you submit an object, right? A Kubernetes object that says, spin me up a new cluster that is, X and Y and Z parameters. And cluster API is that API that does something with that to instantiate the new cluster. So as Chris pointed out earlier, OpenShift, Red Hat, rather than using cluster API, we use a thing called Hive. So if we go to github.com/OpenShift, and we do a search for Hive here, you can see we have this Hive. And Chris, I know you linked this earlier in the chat. So from here, you can look at Hive, you can look kind of across it, and it goes through and kind of explains what it does, how to deploy it, how to take advantage of it. I think, and this is one of those, like Catherine brought it up last week, and it reminded me that Hive has been on my agenda to look at for the better part of a year and a half, and I just haven't gotten there. So I believe that there is an operator, so you can deploy Hive into a cluster to deploy clusters from there, but I don't know for sure. So
let me log into my console real quick and look. Since it just logged me out, that'll take a second. Thanks, cluster.
I'm going to say yes, because just looking at the installation instructions, there's a CRD. So
yeah, so there you go. It's got to be something.
Yeah, there's something there.
Hive for Red Hat OpenShift. It's a community operator right now.
Yep.
I would assume that that's going to be better supported in the future, just because it is provided by Red Hat. So yeah.
Where's my cluster?
So there's that functionality, I think, change. And I can find the link to the operator thingamajiggy.
So according to that, oh yeah, it's right there.
There we go.
Just go to Operator Hub inside of the cluster.
Yeah, right there.
Search for Hive.
And it actually, the repo it links to is the Hive repo you were just showing. So there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. Well, that was easy.
Okay, done. Moving along. All I had to do was log into my cluster and look for it.
SOGUTCU. I'm not even.
Yeah. Sugaku. I'm not, I can't. Sorry. Today's not my day for words.
What's the motivation for single node OpenShift versus code ready containers? So as a product, single node OpenShift is meant for edge type scenarios, right? I'm, out at a cell phone tower, I'm at a remote office, right? Something like that, where I need
your car.
yeah, right. Whatever that happens to be, I need a very small deployment where, I have the, supports, the features, the capabilities of OpenShift without necessarily all of the resiliency of a 3-node cluster, right? Because remember, it's only one node. If that node fails, you can't, there's nothing to fail over to, right? So code ready containers is targeted specifically at developers, although it's also applicable to us administrators. The goal being, on my laptop or my desktop, I use code ready containers to instantiate OpenShift, and then I can start writing my application and I can deploy it locally. I can take advantage of it. It's kind of the local version of code ready workspaces. So code ready workspaces being in a full OpenShift cluster, that development environment, that test environment that I as a developer can interact with. So different use cases for us as administrators, at least, my previous job, I didn't have a desktop. I didn't even have a laptop. I had a VDI. Right. Yeah. I had a virtual desktop. So using something like code ready containers just wasn't an option.
Right.
I had a thin client, and that was all I was given and all I was allowed to use to do any of my, my stuff. But ironically and strangely, I was an administrator, so I had access to vCenter. And so I could go in and I could deploy VMs all day long.
Right.
It was just I couldn't do it locally. So
that's hilarious.
Single node cluster as an administrator means that I can deploy a cluster. I can, do all that testing and validation that I would do normally.
Nice. My lights are dying on me here, so I gotta make a quick change. Here we go.
Oh no. Does that mean you're gonna get all RGB on us?
No, I will look like I'm sitting in the dark, basically. That's all.
So I know we're time flies, when you're having fun, and I know that we've gone through quite a bit of time already. So I have a series of topics or a series of things that I want to talk about with regard to the day 2 stuff that we haven't already talked about. So the good news is, gosh, Chris, how many bullets do I have here? 20,
30. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's no way we're going to cover all of these things in the 20 or so minutes that we have remaining. So just make sure you look for the blog post on Friday. I'll have this whole list inside of there with links to all of the relevant stuff. So that way you can kind of follow along at home in your own time, at your own pace, as the case may be. I'll also say, so our contact information is always in those blog posts, or you can reach out to us on social media, on Discord, etc., to ask questions. Don't hesitate, at any point in time to reach out and, Andrew, why are you saying this? Or why should I care about this? Or I don't care about this. I really care about that type of thing. Don't hesitate at any point in time to reach out with any of that stuff. So day 2. So remember at the beginning, I said, day 1 is kind of the installation process. So if you read the little abstract that we create for each one of these episodes, right? I think this one opens with like, congratulations, you just deployed your cluster. The OpenShift install just finished. Now what? And so that was the impetus, right, where we started with this topic. And I broke this up into 2 different episodes. The first one kind of focusing on the low-level cluster and node configuration type things. The second episode, which will be next week, so far as I know, focusing on, I'll focus a little bit on storage, right? So things like CSI, entry provisioners, networking config, if you need to do networking, day 2 networking stuff, and also user config. Basically, what do I need to do to prepare myself and my cluster to host users, to host those developers and the applications that they're creating and churning through and that type of stuff. One of those important ones, like how do I protect the cluster? So today what I want to talk about is, again, those kind of low level node and cluster level operations that are important, or at least from my perspective, important. And again, these may not apply to everyone. There may be things that you do care about that I don't list here. That doesn't mean that they're not important. Just be aware. All right. So the first thing I want to highlight here, so I'm in the OpenShift 4.7 documentation page here. And all I've done, so at the top level here, I've got this post installation configuration section. So this section of documentation is meant to be a collection of, or an attempt at a collection of these types of operations. So this is always a good starting point for basically, what do I do now that my cluster has been deployed? What do I need to do next? So if you don't know of anywhere else to go, this is a good place to start. I'll also offer, if you scroll down here to the stability and performance section, there's a number of things inside of this section of the documentation as well that are important. Just look through here, look for things that, check through each one of these, like CPU manager, right? Do I care about, using CPU manager for any of my applications? Do any of them need the features that are offered by this? If so, I'll deploy the operator and configure it to take advantage of or to make available those features to those applications. Right. So let's come back up here to our, what am I looking for here? I want cluster tests is where I'm going to start. Actually, no, I'm going to start at machine tests. So the first one that I'll talk about here is, remember, particularly if you just followed the default documentation, or if you just did a default IPI install, you're only going to have 2 or 3 worker nodes. So depending on your sizing, you may need to deploy additional nodes, right? And this is where things get, and we've talked about sizing as a topic before. Sizing can be difficult. What's that saying about, predictions are hard, especially about the future?
Yeah.
So we can do all of the sizing that we want, and there's documentation on how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Come on, little window. I think it's inside of here. So control plane node sizing, all of that type of stuff. There's also, if we come down here, I'm not going to scroll anymore, but there's also infrastructure node sizing.
Right.
Basically, the goal is to make a best effort estimation of what those sizes are going to be. And sorry, what was that?
Click, it's the, nope. Yeah. Sorry, go back. And third link down, control plane node sizing.
Yep. You mean post
that? That's what you showed earlier. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
My bad.
I'll post that one into the chat here.
Oh, thanks.
So, if, like most things OpenShift related, you don't have to get it right day one, but it's definitely easiest if you get it right day one. So let's say that, you looked at this, you said, oh, I'll never have more than 100 worker nodes, or I'll never have more than 25 worker nodes. 4 CPUs and 16 gigabytes of memory for the control plane nodes is great. So what happens when I hit 60 worker nodes and my control plane just can't keep up? You can change that day 2, right? It's a little bit of a hassle isn't the right word, but it's definitely some work compared to like worker nodes, right? Effectively, the safest way of doing it is to fail the control plane nodes one at a time and replace them with the new resources. Mm-hmm. Except with non-integrated installs. With non-integrated installs, I think you can turn off the nodes, adjust the resources, and then turn them back on. But it's one of those, it's always best to do it, or to hopefully get our guesstimate as close as possible day one. But for worker nodes, maybe you deploy the first set of worker nodes using the defaults, which are relatively small. I think with most cloud providers, it's like 2 CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM, something like that. If you followed the documentation for the install, I'm going to pick on vSphere down here. And I'm going to choose user provision infrastructure. And I'm going to choose minimum network or minimum resource requirements. You can see if you just go with the minimum here, it's 2 CPUs and 8 gigabytes of RAM. So if that's not enough for your workloads, rather than spinning up, dozens of nodes or something like that, right? You can resize these by effectively with IPI, creating a new machine set and specifying a different CPU and memory count. Maybe I need to change to a different storage domain or data store, right? Create a new machine set that's pointed at the new data store, and then scale up the new machine set and scale down the original one. And you'll end up with those resources moving around and getting to the right nodes, uh, ideally before you have any applications hosted inside of the cluster. You can also create machines of different types and different sizes. And this is importantly where things like taints and node labels come into play, which are controlled through machine sets and IPI, or you can manually label them with UPI and non-integrated. So that is important for things like maybe I have some nodes that have GPUs, maybe I have nodes that have, different networking connectivity or something like that for specific applications. Maybe they have different local storage. I've seen that happen before with some customers where they use local storage on the hosts for very high performance applications like databases and stuff like that. So I want a subset of nodes that have these, massive and expensive NVMe devices. I only want my
Massive,
database on
aka
those.
this big.
Figuratively,
Yeah.
capacity wise. So, having that or doing that additional connectivity beyond just the initial connectivity, node configuration and layout beyond the initial deployment is really super important. I'll also say that, yes, machine autoscaler, cluster autoscaler is there to help with some of those actions, but they still have to be configured too. As we heard Catherine say last week, you absolutely can use machine sets to do node autoscaling with a UPI deployment. And likewise, you can absolutely manually add nodes outside of a machine set with an IPI deployment. Nothing wrong with that. Perfectly supported. And it allows you that flexibility to really tune and adjust the node configuration, the node layout to what's best for your infrastructure. I will say, because this comes up, or I'll paste this into chat because it comes up often. If we're talking like, day, I don't know, 372. So, it's been a minute since we did an install, and oh no, I've completely lost track of things like the ignition files that I used to spin up nodes originally. So you can retrieve that file using that command right there, OC extract. So that pulls out that ignition, and we use that. We point the nodes with UPI or bare metal install. We point the nodes at that file that's hosted somewhere on an HTTP server, or depending on the install method, like vSphere UPI, I can attach it directly to the virtual machine definition. All right.
Sorry, dealing with sick dog.
No, you're fine. I hope she's feeling better. I know you were telling me that she wasn't feeling great before we started. So
yeah, no, she's had a rough night, and now she wants something, and I can't read her new tones and signals and nuances and stuff. So I don't know what's going on. It's fun. Anyways.
Yeah. Well, I hope she gets better.
Me too.
That's rough.
Yeah. No pun intended.
Yeah. That was, yeah. Sorry. So in that same line of thought, if you are choosing to use infrastructure nodes, remember they're not required, but you'll find that most Red Hatters encourage you to use them because effectively infra nodes and the workload designed for infra, so things like the logging service, metric service, all of that other stuff, remember you don't have to entitle those. Your entitlements are reserved or only necessary for nodes that have your applications on them. So unless they're co-hosted, in which case now the whole node has to be licensed. So infra nodes are not a bad thing. Definitely encourage you to set those up. And I do have a link in the documentation here. Let me copy that out. Well, I said I had a link, but I know where it's at. If we go down here to the nodes section and we look for, maybe it's machine management. Here we go. Creating infrastructure machine sets. So this walks through how to create a machine set with IPI that will deploy, right? We can scale it up. It will deploy those new nodes that automatically or already have that infrastructure tag. Conversely, if you're using a UPI or a bare metal type of installation, a non-integrated type of installation, you can add those in after the fact, right? So you can go in and relabel or add a label to your machines, your nodes, and then machine config operator will take any action if it needs to add additional configuration or roles. Importantly, when you're creating an infrastructure machine set, you need to configure each one of the services to be deployed to that infrastructure machine. Let me paste this link inside of there. So if I come down here, for example, to logging, and I go to configuring logging, what we have inside of here is, let's see, logging storage, using tolerations to control OpenShift logging pod placement. So this is effectively how we go through and we configure, for example, Elasticsearch, which is a component of the logging service, so that it will run on our specific and only on our specific infrastructure nodes. So using a combination of a toleration for the infra taint, as well as a node selector for those infra nodes. And I'm going to take a look at chat here. Yeah, Penguin Whisperer, Bacon Fork. I know Chris and I have been chatting about it. His dog got sick a few days ago, but what he told me before, and I'll let him fill in any details as he has an opportunity, is it's just a temporary thing. She should be getting better. So it's just a rough few days, and I definitely sympathize with that. Next on my list here. I see you. You're back.
I am back. Sorry about that, folks. I have no idea what she needs, but she needs something. So try to fill everything and we'll go from there.
Yep. Well, you know, because you and I are on the same team and we have our Slack chat. You can always reach out if you need any help with anything.
Yeah, thank you.
So the next one that I will talk about here is things that modify node configuration or that need node configuration modified. So the example I'm going to use here is Netapp Trident. So if you are a Netapp customer, you want to use Trident as your CSI provisioner for storage volumes, and specifically you want to use iSCSI volumes. They recommend in their documentation a series of worker configuration things for the nodes. Here, I'll copy this guy out and bring it up. So we can see down here, if I'm using iSCSI with rel, then I want to do, make sure these packages are installed. I want to set the session scanning to manual, so on and so forth. So that still applies with OpenShift and with CoreOS. We just have to go about doing it in a slightly different way. So I'm going to copy and paste this gist link into the chat here. And effectively what this gist is doing is two things. So first, it takes a little bash script that applies Netapp's recommended settings.
You can do it.
And then the second part is it takes that script and it puts it onto the node using a machine config. Right. So we're creating a machine configuration. Right. Here's the name. It's going to apply to any worker node or any node that has a role of worker. And we want it to put the contents of that script up above onto this path. And then we're going to create a systemd unit that just executes that script on startup. Basically, make sure every time the node starts that we start the iSCSI daemon, that we have multipath configured, right? All of these other things inside of there. We also want to make sure that those services are turned on as needed. So this is just one example, right? I happen to have recently helped a a joint customer, Netapp OpenShift customer, with exactly this problem, which is why I use this example. But there are others out there, right? There is, I'm sure that Dell EMC, I'm sure Hitachi, Fujitsu, right? Many of our other certified partners make similar recommendations. So this is one of the ways that you can apply that. One thing, and you've probably heard us say this before, is you can't install RPMs. I mean, I think you technically can, but they don't persist inside of CoreOS. So if there's something that needs to be added to the host that's like RPM install, that probably won't work. but that's a limitation of CoreOS. Let's switch over and make sure that there's no questions or anything. Again, we've only got a couple minutes left, so any last minute questions, please don't hesitate to reach out with those.
Throw them in now.
And then I think the last thing that I will talk about today, and I'll follow on with a couple more of these next week, as well as putting them all into the blog post.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned before configuring time synchronization. So this link I'll paste. Fun. Yeah. So, I'm an old school vSphere admin. And time synchronization was always a big deal.
Yeah.
So it's like the first thing I always look for, and especially it's also important with OpenShift because things like, certificates depend on time being accurate. Logging depends on time being accurate. All kinds of other things.
Time is everything, is what I used to tell people.
Yeah. So, configuring time synchronization, super important. One of the first things I do with all of my clusters. So I'll use that as the last one I talk about today. But I also want to highlight that if you leverage GitOps and the Argo CD operator, you can make this super easy to reproduce across all of your clusters.
Definitely. Yeah.
So if you're not familiar with GitOps, if you haven't started to look into that and check and see whether or not it's a viable option, definitely check out Christian Hernandez live stream. So his happens every other Thursday. So not tomorrow, but next week, I believe, is the next one.
Yes.
So definitely check out his live stream. He goes through a lot of great stuff around how to, oftentimes it's from a developer perspective, right? How to deploy applications. But the same exact stuff applies to administrators and configuring the cluster. He's also been doing, and I've been helping to review some of the blog posts he's been putting on OpenShift.com. So some really great blog posts there as well about how to, I need to do these things in this specific order. I need to create a meta application of multiple applications, right? Or multiple.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using application here because that's the GitOps term, but really it's any Kubernetes configuration that you want to apply, like a machine config operation.
3 minutes.
Yep.
2 minutes. Sorry.
So maybe that's a good topic for us to highlight at some point. We can do a demo of using GitOps to administer the cluster, not just to deploy applications.
That's a very good idea.
I know it. Any excuse to bring Christian on and interrupt his workout,
Yeah. I'm surprised he's not on right now listening to us.
He may be. He's probably, cursing us as he's listening like a podcast. Okay, so as you said, we're basically down to the wire here because we have a hard stop at noon Eastern time, which is in less than 2 minutes now. So first thing I want to say is thank you so much to our audience today. Really appreciate everybody who has been on, who has asked questions, who's interacted with us. Please, if you have any additional questions, if there's anything we didn't get to, if there's anything you're curious about, you can reach out. Andrew.Sullivan@redhat.com if email is your preferred method. There's also Discord, which I'm sure Chris is posting the Discord link right now. Yep. There is also Twitter. You can reach out to me at Practical Andrew, just like my username there in Twitch, which gets rebroadcast across the others. You can reach out to me at any point in time. Happy to answer those questions. Yeah, that's all I got. So
all you got? All right. Well, without further ado, thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Sorry I had to duck out for a little bit. But we will find answers to those questions that we said we were going to. I'm already working on a couple of them right now. But coming up next, OpenShift Commons with one of my very good friends, Baruch from JFrog. I can't say his last name, and he knows that, so that's okay. All right, folks. See you soon.
Bye now.
And we are rolling. We are live. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Michael Waite. This is another edition of the OpenShift Commons Briefings Operator Hours. And what I'm going to do right now is I like to say, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to click. It's now sharing. Now I'm going to ask the question that everyone wants to know. Can you see my screen? Hopefully the answer is yes.
Yes.
And today on the Operator Hours show here, we have JFrog with us. And not just JFrog, but we have Baruch Sodogursky, who is the head of developer advocacy at JFrog. And very happy to have you here. And what's interesting is today's topic is going to be all about what is liquid software. So Baruch, thank you for joining us here today. What exactly did you mean when you titled this, What is Liquid Software? Because frankly, I want to know.
That's good. That's good. Hey, Mike, thank you for having me. Everybody, hello. Probably some of you heard about JFrog and our motto, the Liquid Software Company. And I'm glad that people are asking about that because it's an interesting concept. The idea of liquid software is that we as an industry should strive to move towards software updates, continuous software updates, which are so frequent and so small that it looks like software flows from the development to the target, and it almost looks like liquid. And this concept of liquid software is about switching from bulk and rare deployments into frequent and tiny continuous updates.
Okay, excellent. Good intro there. So let's talk about you. I understand from when. Well, first of all, is that a little hot in the background there? I mean, you've got a fire on your wall.
Yeah, technology,
Be switching to air conditioning.
Yeah. The beauty of it is that it doesn't emit any. Well, it does emit some heat, but definitely not
and
on
never
the fire.
never have to stock wood in the thing either. That's pretty cool.
Exactly.
So how long? So you've been at JFrog for quite some time. What exactly does it mean to be head of developer advocacy?
So yeah, I've been with JFrog for 9.5 years almost, and for a longest time, most of this time, for 7 years, I was the only person in official developer relations capacity. The thing with developer relations that everybody do it, so I cannot say I was the only one who did developer relations, because everybody do developer relations, whether they want it or not, whether they think about it or not. In the end of the day, we all affect the relationship between the company and the developers and the users. But I was the only one who had anything to do with developer relations in their title. I was the only developer advocate. Now we grew a lot, and we have an entire team of developer relations which contain different roles. Not only developer advocates, but also community builders and engineers, full-time engineers, that deal with partners, integrations, and user experience. But I'm leading the developer advocates team.
Okay, cool. And 9.5 years. So wait a minute. What's on your sleeve? Is that a JFrog shirt?
It is a JFrog shirt. It is a WonderFrog shirt. And what is your shirt?
Huh. It's kind of strange. I actually got up this morning and I put on this shirt that I got. I can save your binaries and you can save the world. I got this at a trade show in Portland, Oregon. I think there was like a DockerCon, or maybe it was like one of the first KubeCons or something, and I bumped into Raj, and I think I wear this shirt about maybe once every 2 years. It's unbelievable that we both picked the same day to be putting our shirt on.
Well, we might thank Zack Snyder for it, the Snyder Cut and everything. Kind of Wonder Woman is back to our minds, so maybe that's the reason.
I gotta tell you, I don't generally take T-shirts from trade shows, but Raj, Raj, he's no longer there anymore. But you guys like have the best T-shirts at trade shows.
That's very true.
When we get to go finally to KubeCon, which is the one coming up in LA, which hopefully will be in person, I think everybody should swing over to the JFrog booth. They, honest to God, they have the best quality T-shirts, and they're definitely worth wearing and not turning into a shop rag in your garage like most of the other ones. So.
Absolutely. I hope our software is as good as our T-shirts. Let's put it that way.
It's just an amazing coincidence that we both decided to have this shirt on at the same time. So JFrog, what's in the name? I mean, it's a frog. There's a J in front of it. Is it a Java frog? Is it, John Frog? What is it? You've been there for 9. How old is the company? I mean, is the company like 10 years old or what?
Yeah, the company is actually more. The company itself been around since 2009, so it's 12 years. But the name JFrog is even older. It's been around since 2006, when the first version of Artifactory came out. It's interesting how every time you have some kind of weird name or a fancy name, people always have a story, right? So the one that I keep thinking about is Black Duck, for example. So when we asked the founders of Black Duck, they told us a very touching story about the actual duck that was hurt on the property of one of the founders, and he was a young kid, and he kind of nurtured this duck to health and everything else, and since then it's kind of a black duck. We tried to come up with a story in hindsight when people started to ask, so why JFrog? But you know what? One of our co-founders in French, and they have a weird relationship with frogs. They eat their legs. So I wasn't sure. We weren't sure if we can come up with something that will be authentic enough. Like, what are we gonna say? Fred ate some French legs, frog's legs, and this is why it's frog. Doesn't sound so good. But truth to be told, when we just started, Yoav Landman, another co-founder of JFrog, started this project in Artifactory. He looked for a name for kind of a space or an organization. It wasn't a company back there that will be catchy, that will be we can play with graphics and social and stuff, and also have like a domain and a Twitter handle that was available. J back then really stood for Java. That's a right observation, because the software, we were all before JFrog, we were all in the Java consultancy shop. So Java was our expertise back then. Artifactory is written in Java, and also back then the only thing it did was supporting Java Maven build tool. Obviously, a lot of water under the bridge since then. Now it's incredibly universal. Support 27 different package types, all the way from development to the ops concerns, and all the modern programming languages, and also all the package tools on the operating system side, and the new services in the JFrog platform are not even written in Java anymore. But yeah, JFrog has history.
Okay. I wanted to point out that, we're live on Twitch. We're obviously live here on this Blue Jeans Bridge, and we're live on YouTube. People can ask questions for Baruch, put them into the chat down below, and they'll magically pop up over here onto our bridge, so we'll be able to address them. And we'd like to challenge everyone to, this is called the Stump the Baruch Hour. I'm told that there's no question too tough for Baruch, and anyone who can stump Baruch is going to get one of their very own JFrog t-shirts. It might
Yeah.
not be this one, but
Yeah.
we'll definitely get a 2012 edition JFrog sent off to anyone who can stump the Baruch. So
Challenge
I
accepted. Let's do that.
I just made that up. I haven't talked to your
Let's
marketing
do
people
that.
about that
I
yet.
had
They're gonna-
no idea that this is what it is, but let's do it.
I just made it. So your marketing people are going to be like, Mike, what are you talking about? We don't have any. I'm like, I'll pay for it. I'll put it on my card.
We have
So-
t-shirts. We definitely going to send t-shirts to whoever asks great questions, and
Yeah.
that's on me. I'll take care of it.
Okay, no problem. So first great question from me. Ow, just banged the funny bone. Perfect timing. So you're here on our TV show, the OpenShift Commons Briefings Operator Hours. It's not a mistake, right? I mean, your technical people have been working with ours to test and certify your software on the Red Hat portfolio. It's good for customers. It sends that message of like, the Reese's peanut butter cup moment of better together, my chocolate, your peanut butter, JFrog and OpenShift is, better than sliced bread. So, we're interested in helping to promote your company, your agenda, and getting visibility for your products on top of our portfolio. What is, your open source story?
Yeah.
I mean, every company has an open source story. I'm at, we're at Red Hat. I've been here since 2002. So I guess like 21 years. And, Red Hat has a pretty solid open source story. We're one of the few companies that's been able to generate $1 billion selling free software. What's your story?
Right. So we started, as I already mentioned, as an open source tool. 2006 Artifactory, you can download it and have a proxy for your Maven artifacts and Maven builds. Since then, a lot of time passed, and we still have the open source version, and that's obviously the most downloaded and the most used in all the software that the JFrog provides is the Artifactory open source. It's still
When
a Java
you say
tool.
most downloaded, what is that, like 10,000 downloads, 100,000 downloads? Like, what does that mean?
We stopped measuring downloads a long time ago. We have this number and it's in the millions every year. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything just because, as our CEO used to say, my grandma can download Artifactory, and he's right. But it's also a tool which is a part of a lot of pipelines and tool chains. And that means that there might be a lot of robots that download it time and time again to set up their pipeline, the pipeline of the pipelines, if you wish. So bragging about downloads doesn't really mean anything.
I was just trying to quantify big number.
Yeah, it is a big number. It is a big number, but again, we don't know why. We don't know how many of them using it. And being like honest, open source, we don't really know a whole lot about those users. We don't have any, call home, or they don't feel any. There is no paywall, so they just go ahead and grab it and use it. And this is the open source part. Now, as the time passed, we felt that. First of all, we went very, very cloud native. I think or cloud first, should I say? The first usage that you think about how do we use JFrog software should be, in our perspective, you use it in the cloud, you use it in a service. You select the right cloud, and we support all of them, including obviously OpenShift. You select the right region, you select the right setup, and then you just consume it as a cloud. And this obviously conflicts with this downloadable open source version, right? Because downloadable open source means it's not as a service. So we started to think, how can we maintain the accessibility and the ease of use of the open source version, just download and use it with the cloud. And this is how we now have the free tier, which is fully blown artifact JFrog platform for whatever it is cost if you buy it for on-prem, but you can use it in the cloud for free up to certain limits. So this is kind of also what we try to give back to the community. Now, since we have that, and it's not really open source because it's a service, right? The question is, okay, how do we keep giving back to the open source community? Because obviously, all of our software uses 80% open source components, like every other software component in the world, right? We use everything from a bunch of frameworks and libraries. And then we decided we want to give, on top of free tier, even more. We want to give like fully functional with elevated limits, the entire JFrog platform for open source projects. And we run this program for many years, and we have very high visible open source projects in Apache and CNCF and the Linux Foundation, and many others used JFrog Artifactory for free under this project. And now we kind of changing this program to give the entire JFrog platform for free for open source projects. We're going to relaunch this program in our user conference, JFrog Swamp Up, which is coming up in May. By the way, the conference is free. You're going to get some awesome JFrog t-shirts. There is tons of amazing content. Chris Short, who was here briefly in the opening, spoke, I think, at least twice at Swamp Up, so he can attest how great this conference is, at least I hope. And yeah, during this conference, we're going to restart this program. So if you have an open source project and you look for a platform that will help you release faster and get eventually to the liquid software concept that we spoke earlier, definitely during Swamp Up, we are going to have something very nice for you to use for free just because you are that awesome and you do open source.
We usually keep the promotions for events till the end for fillers. So
it's good that I didn't ask.
You jumped ahead of me.
It's good that I
wanted to basically say though, like what do you guys do, right? I mean, you've been there for 9.5 years. You know what you do. I think the majority of the people out there understand what artifact management is, but maybe not. Right? So, like, what is it that JFrog does for the end user?
So the way we phrase it is that we take care of your pipeline all the way from Git to Kubernetes or to OpenShift. What we mean by that is that once you pushed your code to Git, everything else, all the pipeline from this point onward will run on JFrog platform. We will build your code on JFrog pipelines, which is our CI and CD tool. Then you will have JFrog Artifactory as the backbone of your pipeline, and you will take this artifact, test it, whatever this test is it QA, security, licensing, performance, whatever, you will test it. And when you're happy with it, you are going to promote it to the next repository in JFrog Artifactory. The tests themselves, the security and the licensing, we are going to help you testing your dependencies, your third-party dependencies, both for security vulnerabilities and for license compliant using JFrog X-Ray. And in the end of the day, we, again, with JFrog pipelines, the CD part of it, will distribute your application to whatever the end compute is. If it's OpenShift, it will be deployed, the containers will be deployed. If it's internal distribution, it will replicate to the right instances of JFrog Artifactory for other developers to use. If it's edge computing, it will be delivered to Artifactory Edge and then using P2P to the compute itself. Whatever the distribution is, we will take care of distribution as well. So everything from source to the runtime, we can help you deliver faster.
Why can't we just do that ourselves?
Of course you can. I mean, there is, in the end of the day, it's just software. It's just something that people wrote, so probably other people can write it as well. The question is, do you want to spend your time now writing software for your pipeline or writing software for your users and customers?
When I started here in 2002, I was a solutions architect, and I was one of 5 in the whole company. And, we would travel all around the world, and I would, be going, I'd do a tour through Singapore and then over to Japan and make my way back, or maybe to go through Australia or whatever. But we actually, it was amazing back in 2002 and 2003 that, we were going into customers and everybody, there was so many Linux experts everywhere, right? And everyone was trying to become their own Linux expert to create their value and build their career around, I'm the Linux guy here at, Reebok, or I'm the Linux guy here at this company. And the really savvy customers at the time recognized that they didn't want to be in the business of becoming Linux experts. They wanted to be in the business of focusing on their core business, which was whatever, commercial banking or building the best tennis shoes or whatever it was. So I totally get it. Early on in new technologies, there's always people who are like, I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to, but, having people like JFrog who are like, just use our tooling and then you guys go focus on your core business makes a lot of sense. So that's your open source story. Who are the other companies out there? Are you the only one out there that makes, and is it fair enough to say that artifact management is the 2 words that sums up JFrog and your tools?
Yeah, pretty much. You can say that, absolutely, because we get into the picture once the artifact is ready to be created, and then take it through, manage it all the way through when it's ready to go live into production. So yeah, pretty much.
Okay. So how's business? I mean, you guys have one of the best t-shirts around. You've got a tremendous amount of momentum. There's a lot of, arts being written about JFrog, but like, how's business? If you look at companies that were trending, take Docker, for example, Docker, the company, not Docker, the technology, they were, the shiny object for years. Docker, and you go to DockerCon, and, Docker had this huge booth, but they weren't really able to convert that into a viable business. So is JFrog just a lot of hype? Do you guys just have, nice, purple backgrounds and frogs on shirts, or are you folks actually becoming a dominant player out there that customers can really rely on to help run their business?
So I think that was an interesting question circa 2013. And I think that the industry kind of gave its answer. We have more than 6,000 paying customers. I think the overwhelming majority of whatever Forbes top 500, 100 or whatever, we're everywhere. We went public about half a year ago, and I think, not that I'm a big expert, it was a successful IPO. And today, when people think about artifact management, they think about either JFrog or JFrog Artifactory in particular. So I think this question has been answered profoundly in the last at least 5-6 years. And the most interesting answer to that is that now everybody are doing it. I remember back in the day, the whole concept of artifact management was met with a lot of skepticism. Why do you even care about the binary artifacts? I mean, you have your source. This is the most important thing. You have it in your subversion, and you can, if you need, like, you just build it and put it in production, done. There is no artifact to manage. And we, along other players in the industry, I would say, defined this domain of artifact management, defined it with a lot of sweat and blood. But in the end of the day, today, it's something that you install JFrog Artifactory, or you get a service with JFrog Artifactory as the prerequisite for doing anything, together with your GitHub account and whatever you want to use for continuous integration and your runtime platform. This became a standard in how you develop software, and this is, I think, the biggest change that happened in the last decade and in our corner of the industry, if you wish. And the fact that we are now, that everybody are doing it and everybody are competing with JFrog in this area or another of this artifact management, I think that's the best proof that the business is good.
But are you guys better than? I mean, there's other companies out there that do something similar, right? So are you guys the the best?
Well,
I mean, why would I want to use JFrog as opposed to one of the other companies?
Yeah. So if you ask me, I'm obviously very, very biased, and I will obviously tell you that yes, obviously we are the best. There are some objective reasons to use JFrog. I'm comparing to others. One of the reasons that me personally is very important, I find it very important, is I will give you maybe 3 reasons real quick. The first is universal. Whatever technology you want to use, JFrog platform will support it. And this is very important because we don't want to dictate you as being just a part of your pipeline. We don't want to dictate you how you write your code, how you build your code, what stack are you running with, what is your deployment target, what cloud you want to use. None of those should be decisions that you have to compromise on because a technology in your stack doesn't support what you want to do, right? If you want to use Rust, if you want to use Go, if you want to use Java, if you want to use C#, JavaScript, if you want to pack it in containers or Debian files or RPM files, if you want to deploy it on the cloud, if you want to deploy it on-prem, whatever cloud you want to deploy, we have to be there supporting all of them. And this is what we do. So this is the first huge advantage. The second one is our obsession with metadata. One of the reasons why the shift from, hey, I just have a source code and I build it and I throw it in production, actually happened to, hey, I need to manage my artifacts, is the understanding of the industry that there are tons of questions that you might have to answer about your artifacts in any point of life. Before you deploy it, during the pipeline, after you deploy it, when you operate it, when you monitor it, the more you know about your artifacts, the better. And this is why we in JFrog pour tons of effort into getting you as much metadata about your artifacts as possible. How they were created, from what sources, using what tools, in which point, how the promotion went, which decisions did you make, why did you make those decisions, who made those decisions. So when you need to answer questions like, what is this artifact, how it came to be, why it was deployed the way it was deployed, why it was built the way it was built, you will have all those answers at the ready. And when you need to go back in time and find the right artifact for any reason that you